Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the matrix. Well, it seems it's time for the truth to come out. Don't you all agree? Truth has no filter, nor can it be held back. That's our slogan, by the way. And they've tried to hold the truth back in this case, and it's becoming more and more difficult, every day passing. When the crime was committed, the truth was right there. It was always there. Yet, it was so painful to accept that truth that it was covered up. But something covered up will eventually be uncovered. And this is where we have to take the time to acknowledge all that have worked to do so. There have been many genuine true crime investigators and commentators who have worked very hard in this case. The true crime community is not a gullible group of individuals. They investigate crimes to understand. They investigate crimes not to echo what the mainstream media presents. Rather, they investigate to reach the truth. And this has caused a major problem in the Idaho murder case for not only the mainstream media, but for law enforcement, and ultimately the courts. So no matter the circumstances, no matter the outcomes, we want to personally thank all that have dedicated time and effort into seeing this case through to the end. Truth is what the chaos fights for, and we won't hold back in pursuing it. Okay, now we were notified about the recent so-called breaking news about Bethany and Dylan. While we were working on the prior episode, we didn't include those findings because that episode was long enough. And you know the chaos, we would have went off on a tangent. So we deal with it now. We will examine the transcript deeper, which includes more specifics about what we touched on prior. Let's start from 2 a.m. This is the defense's objection to the state's motion in limine regarding text messages and testimony.
At 2:10 a.m., Dylan texted E.G. inquiring if he was driving. Okay, now E.G. is allegedly Eric Grower from Pullman, Washington. Keep in mind, we depict him as Batman because his identity is a secret, lurking around in the shadows in the town of Moscow. Then at 2:13 a.m., Batman texts Dylan back, confirming he was driving. Now, if this is deemed official, then based on this approximated time, Kaylee and Madison didn't arrive back at home around 1:56 a.m. And this creates a huge hole in the, the chaos meter is building. I have to sidetrack for a moment, bear with me. Olivia claimed that she observed Kaylee and Madison arriving back home at 1:56 a.m. via the security camera footage. If Dylan has texted Batman at 2:10 a.m. about the girls being driven back home, then this means they weren't at home with everyone else, Bethany, Ethan, and Xana, right? They all arrived back home approximately around 1:45 a.m. There's a discrepancy with time, down to the minutes. That's starting to frustrate me. If they arrived back at home around 1:56 a.m., as Olivia stated, then Dylan's text to Batman would have been around 1:53 a.m., then a response from Batman at 1:56 a.m. as he enters the neighborhood, and is confirmed via the security camera footage, which confirms what Olivia stated. But Dylan didn't text at that time, so this means they didn't arrive back at 1:56 a.m., which means Olivia was, lying. Why would she lie about it? We'll come back to that. Either they didn't arrive back at home around 1:56 a.m., which means Olivia was lying, or they did, and Dylan was calling Batman for another reason. There's no way to cover up the fuckery here. Something is gonna leak out. Then we have the purpose of Dylan even inquiring about a ride for Kaylee and Madison. They never text her about being stranded or not being able to find a ride, so why would she be concerned if they got a ride? Oh, she's a great friend. We know this isn't the case. Let's continue before I lose it. 2:53 a.m., Madison calls Bethany. Now at this point, Kaylee has started calling Jack, right? And it is assumed they are all at home. But there is no indication that they communicated because there is nothing detailed. So we can assume that this call from Madison was also urgent because it aligns with the urgent calls that Kaylee was making to Jack. Bethany seemed to ignore the call, it appears so. Then at 3:51 a.m., Dylan creates a new contact in her phone, which was Batman. How do you have the time to be adding contacts into your phone during a massacre? Put that into perspective. Unless that contact was someone who needed to help keep the massacre's truth a secret. Insanity. By 3:51 a.m., we concluded that those housemates were already deceased, and within this 3 a.m. hour, everything had unfolded. Again, 2:20 a.m. is when we hear commotion via the Linda Lane surveillance. Around 2:30 a.m., Kaylee attempts to call Jack. This was approximately 30 minutes of attempted contact, which ended around 3 a.m. In addition, there was no mention of Madison attempting to call Bethany in the early stages of the investigation during that same time frame. At 2:58 a.m., a white vehicle is spotted driving on Taylor Avenue. 3:06 a.m. a dog is heard howling via the Linda Lane surveillance. 3:12 a.m. individuals are spotted running away from the neighborhood. 3:30 a.m. a light-colored vehicle is spotted circling Queen Road apartments via Linda Lane surveillance. 3:56 a.m. a white vehicle is spotted driving down Queen Road via the neighbor's security camera, and more footage from Linda Lane of a vehicle circling the apartments at 4:05 a.m. and 4:07 a.m. Then 4:20 a.m. a vehicle is spotted down Queen Road via the neighbor's security camera. All of this activity is surrounding the murders at the home. Let's continue though. At 4:19 a.m. Bethany calls Dylan. A minute later, Dylan calls Zana, then Kaylee, and then Bethany for 41 seconds. At 4:21 a.m., Bethany calls Zana, then Dylan calls Madison, and at 4:22 a.m., Bethany calls Madison, then again. Now this is a key moment for Bethany, because Madison attempted to call her around 2:50 a.m., and she didn't call back until almost 2 hours later. And that time frame is within the time frame the attacks and murders occurred. So based on this information, it is suggested that Bethany was willing to allow the attacks to happen as well. Then she calls Ethan at 4:22 a.m. Dylan says to Bethany, quote, "No one is answering," unquote. Okay, now why did they give details of this communication but not the prior communication at 4:20 a.m.? It's a text message, sure, but they were talking for 41 seconds. Surely there was a lot said in that phone call. Also, keep in mind, during these exchanges, there is a vehicle captured via the neighbor's security camera driving on Queen Road. Dylan then says to Bethany, quote, "I'm really confused right now." 4:22 a.m. Dylan texts Kaylee, then again asking what's going on. Now at this point, the housemates are deceased, and Dylan knows this, so what do we make of this text to Kaylee? I won't say it was a mockery, rather used as an alibi. The chaos gives Dylan the benefit of the doubt to not be mocking the deaths, but who knows? At 4:23 a.m., Bethany communicates via Snapchat. It is alleged that Bethany actually took photos of everything. At 4:23 a.m., Bethany texts Dylan, quote, "Yo dude, what the fuck?" Zana was wearing all black. Dylan texts to Bethany, "I'm freaking out right now. And no, it's like a ski mask almost." Bethany responds, "Shut the fuck up," and actually. Now we don't know what the statement actually infers here, but Bethany telling Dylan to shut the fuck up is a bit odd. Because this is not a phone call, these are text messages. It would be different if they were on a phone call, and Bethany wanted Dylan to be quiet, as she may have heard something. But these are text messages, so why would she tell her to shut up? Is she telling Dylan to shut up because she is scared? Possible. Okay, so we went over all of the other nonsense. Everyone can review what it says for a moment for the review. At 4:27 a.m., Dylan made an outgoing call. Yeah, it would have been great to know who this person was, you see. Because whoever Dylan called at 4:27 a.m. is being informed about the murders. And there's the confirmation that the news got out before sunrise. We already pointed this out in our investigation, and you're seeing the proof. Again, Dylan sends a message on Snapchat twice, then attempts to call Kaylee again. Then a minute later, she attempts to call Zana. At 4:29 a.m., Bethany calls Madison, and again a minute later, then Kaylee twice. At 4:32 a.m., Dylan texts Kaylee, and at 4:34 a.m., Bethany accessed Snapchat. They were on Snapchat in the wee hours of Sunday morning, my friends, and this pulls the covers back. If the news spread before the alleged alert around 8 a.m., then we also have to assume guess who would be there. That's right, Moscow PD, or better yet, the unmarked Ford Fusion. Bad news travels at light speed, and if they weren't already involved, then they surely became aware of the murders soon enough. Because someone out of that college circle wasn't capable of keeping quiet about it. Perhaps someone who was a real friend. The statement, "It's okay, I'm gonna help you," has more context now, right? What if this would be Batman? After all, Dylan added him to her contacts, and he would be the last person suspected of anything, as he's just a mere driver who dropped the victims off home hours prior. Yeah, he provided a so-called alibi, but if he was in direct communication with Dylan, who is obviously a conspirator, then it's possible he came back to help, you know what, it makes sense. Does everyone recall that Batman claimed that he would take drunk kids to get their stomachs pumped? Well, with that type of, quote, messy cleanup work, it seems he would be willing to help clean up the mess in the home. Bingo, we got him. I'll hand the rest over to my colleagues.
Interesting, very, very interesting. He stated that he would take college kids who suffered from alcohol poisoning to get their stomachs pumped. Now, although he isn't doing it, clearly Batman was familiar with a lot of mess in his vehicle left by drunk college kids. He was used to cleaning up bodily fluids. And blood? well, that's just more bodily fluid he would help clean up. And since Dylan was in direct communication with Batman and added him to her contact list around 3:51 a.m., the statement, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," fits that puzzle space perfectly. Everyone was racking their brains about who made that statement and what context was it used in. First, it was assumed to be Koberger, used in some sick way, then it was assumed it was law enforcement, but lo and behold, it was someone that wasn't even thought of. Another key element introduced is that Batman was physically inside that home, despite claiming he never drove entirely up to the driveway. Perhaps his DNA is in the home. Wait, let's calm everything down. The chaos meter is rapidly building. No problem at 4:37 a.m., Bethany accessed Instagram. Then at 7:30 a.m., she calls her dad. Then 30 minutes later at 8 a.m., she calls once more. And another call at 8 a.m. to another number. Now let's stop right here for a moment. Let me sort of pull everyone back up to speed if you catch my drift. This entire timeline of attempted calls and text messaging is centered around violence in the home. So we have to remember that these can't be genuine inquiries from Dylan and Bethany, because they spent too much time attempting to call and text the victims when they would know what was physically happening. So the constant attempts to call Kaylee, Madison, Ethan, and Zana would be irrational in the setting of wondering what's going on. Let me walk you through it a bit more. Let's say they were wondering what's going on, without any screaming, yelling, and loud noise indicating violence existed. Well, if you're attempting to call your housemates and they're not answering, then maybe they're asleep, right? Why continue to attempt to call them then? And if you assume something was wrong, at what point do you decide to physically go to their bedrooms to find out what was wrong? If you never go to either of their bedrooms to find out what's going on, yet continue your attempts to contact them from a distance, then what scenario would this be? If you're concerned and there is no response from your housemates, then will you continue to attempt communicating via cell phone? Surely after the first few attempts, the curiosity will start to eat away at you, making you get up and walk to those bedrooms. They never did this, so it only creates the setting where they were either too scared to observe what happened or was complicit in what happened. The only question we have is, are both a part of the conspiracy? Because Dylan has been proven to be a part of it. It's that simple. Keep this in mind because they have conflated two scenarios into one, which is impossible. Either they were aware of the violence or they weren't. You can't merge the two scenarios together, but that's what this crap has done. Let's continue though. At 8 a.m., Bethany called, quote, another number. Who would this be? We'll never know. Also, there is approximately 3 hours of no communication or activity, from the time Bethany accessed Instagram at 4:37 a.m. until calling her dad at 7:30 a.m. What was Bethany doing? Was she sleeping? Can't imagine she slept in a home full of slain housemates. Is it possible she had left the home? Maybe this is the person who she called to come get her, the quote, another number. At 8:01 a.m., she calls home, then a minute later, calls her mother. Then 8:09 a.m., her dad calls her. From 8:05 a.m. to 10 a.m., Dylan was on Instagram. Really? What happened to her concern about what was going on in the home? Also, what activity and communication was taking place from Dylan, because we know neither went to sleep in the home? Where were they during this time frame? And why are they on social media instead of calling friends over at this point in time? Mind you, Bethany called her parents, so this means she was preparing to leave the home due to what happened. Okay, at least there are details here that prove Bethany was aware of what happened and was trying to get away from Moscow. But what was Dylan doing? There's no call to her parents. At 8:41 to 8:42 a.m., Bethany takes photos. Takes photos of what exactly? If she took photos, then we have to add this to evidence in the investigation. It had to be inside the home or something relevant to the crime scene. It seems out of left field, to be honest, almost depicted in a casual manner. But I don't think it was casual. It was to make sure she can prove something when the shit hits the fan. Anywho, at 9:04 a.m., Bethany's mother texts her. At 10 a.m., Dylan is on Snapchat, then on Instagram, then on Indeed, and again on Snapchat. I noticed something here. Do you notice that there is no communication between Bethany and Dylan at this point? It seems that Bethany has either left the home or is preparing to leave, and Dylan doesn't have much to say, right? What could she actually say? Oh, don't leave, Bethany. Or, where are you going? Perhaps those text messages exist, but of course that would make things even worse. Then at 10:23 a.m., Dylan texts Madison. This is not what happened, because Dylan would just go upstairs and find out what the problem was. Then again, she hops on Instagram a minute later, then back on Snapchat. Now, at this point, everyone who wasn't aware of the murders in town surely know. At 11:21 a.m., JM texts Bethany, "We don't know whose initials these are. Someone feel free to inform us who that would be." Now look at all of the following information about Dylan's activity. It's all on social media. Until finally, at 11:39 a.m., she texts her father. I wonder what she told her father, right? At 11:49 a.m., Bethany calls JM. 11:44 a.m., Dylan hops back on Instagram. 11:50 a.m., Dylan calls EA. Now we assume this is Emily. Okay, at 11:51 a.m., JM texts Dylan. And the rest is a bunch of texts between everyone until 11:56 a.m., where Bethany called 911. So it was Bethany who called. Now remember, Moscow PD initially stated they wouldn't reveal who called 911. Now why would they conceal who had called 911? Why would it be a problem to reveal that one of the surviving housemates was the one who made the call? That's what they're supposed to do, right? Well, they didn't want to reveal it was one of the surviving housemates, because what would they be calling about if not a massacre? So of course, there was this fuzzy setting in the home where a call was made about an unconscious housemate, which ironically was one of the surviving housemates. A narrative pushed to create the setting where there was no blood and everyone just appeared drunk from last night. Yep.
Here's the thing about Bethany, she can have exculpatory evidence that exonerates Koberger, but still be a suspect, you see? In essence, she's pretty much in the same position as Dylan, but at least she can provide the defense with the information and evidence that helps their client. Whatever happens after that, well, that's something Bethany and her lawyer has to figure out. But let's look at what the defense summarizes about this information. Quote, the state has selected text messaging as excited utterances and present sense impression. The totality of circumstances defeat the state's request. Bethany and Dylan texted each other a handful of times, and then they were in the same bedroom. They were together with the ability to talk to each other. They were not asleep for 8 hours. The messages the state seeks admission of as exceptions to hearsay began with a call and a message about being confused. After texting each other and unsuccessfully speaking with any of their roommates, the pair were together. The state is looking at the messages with the benefit of hindsight. The analysis has to be done in the moment the utterances were made, text messages in this case. Dylan's first claims confusion, then after communicating with Bethany, claims fear to leave her room. Despite her stated fear of leaving her room, she does so and joins Bethany downstairs. To get to Bethany's bedroom, Dylan passed the front door of the residence. Bethany was steps from the front door. Neither of them left the house. Neither of them called friends, family, or law enforcement for help. Instead, both have a substantial amount of activity beginning in earnest less than 4 hours after Dylan made her way to Bethany's bedroom. Bethany and Dylan communicate with friends and parents, and Dylan is on social media. The second grouping of message the state claim fit within the exception to the hearsay rule are those from Dylan to her roommates, beginning at 10:23 a.m., 6 hours later. The state claims Dylan woke up and realized her roommates had not responded to her earlier texts. The state is wrong. Dylan was awake. She was messaging on Snapchat, she was on Instagram, and she texted with her dad, and this not an exhaustive list of activity on her phone. She was with Bethany, who was also communicating with her parents and then later friends, unquote. And of course it states that the defense pushes to deny this motion. What the defense is doing in a very subtle manner is poking holes in Dylan's affidavit, which is the only person who has provided accounts of what was going on in the home. If she wasn't frozen in a shocked phase and locked herself in her bedroom and fell asleep, then that affidavit needs to be thrown out. And well, like we stated, you have to do the investigation over. One would say, wait, Koberger's DNA, just stop it. Let me explain why the investigation has to be done over, despite the alleged DNA of the suspect in custody discovered. Well, they would have to start over based on the other male DNA discovered, including blood DNA and DNA found under Madison's fingernails, but whatever. If one of the surviving housemates' accounts have her frozen in a shocked phase and went to sleep afterwards, yet the total opposite occurred during that reported time frame, then first off, Dylan would be aware of the attacks and never called for help. And then she was aware that her housemates were murdered and never called for help, and to add insult to injury, sat in the home for damn near 12 hours before a call was made, which didn't come from her, but was capable of surfing social media? Now, we're not focusing on Bethany right now. We're focusing on the affidavit from Dylan, which provided a description of the suspect in custody right now. Second, if her accounts were fabricated, then when did she spot the wait? Let's see here. Let's go back to the texting while attacks were unfolding. At 4:23 a.m., this is when there was a description of the alleged lone killer, right? Quote, no, it's like a ski mask almost. And like he had something over his forehead and on his mouth, unquote. This was at 4:23 a.m., right? Well, the vehicle that is spotted at 4:20 a.m. is being depicted as Koberger. Well, this would be literally impossible to run through that home in less than 5 minutes. They put up a fight, remember? The vehicle is entering the neighborhood, not departing. So this can't be Koberger's vehicle, based on Dylan's description of the alleged Koberger as he is leaving the home at 4:23 a.m. Again, even if some would suggest that it was Koberger's vehicle at 4:20 a.m., you have to park the vehicle, get out and walk, rather creep up to the home, scope the scene inside, then walk inside and attack. This is damn near 5 minutes just preparing to attack, let alone leaving out around 4:23 a.m., you see? So these two elements do not align with each other. Then you have to consider there's no initial contact between the two housemates, or better yet, who text who about what was going on. It starts off with them already communicating about it all, you see? Quote, Bethany, are you awake? Yeah, I'm awake. What's up? I think someone is in the house, some guy in all black. Really? Where are you at? I'm in my room, but I'm freaking out. I saw him. He has like a ski mask almost. Unquote. It didn't start off with them discovering the problem. It starts off with them already aware of the problem. And this is due to trying to protect the previous evidence of them being aware of the attacks. And what this does ultimately is brings doubt to there being a lone killer. Why does this happen? Well, because if the housemates were not willing to do anything about it, then logic suggests that they knew the murders would happen or knew of the individuals who carried it out. And this is also supported by the fact that they waited 8 hours before calling the authorities. What prompted Bethany to call 911 at 11:56 a.m. instead of earlier that Sunday morning? What did she realize then that she didn't realize earlier, you see? Fear is not the excuse, because once again, based on this activity, they were coherent. They were thinking rationally as they were calling their housemates, texting and calling others even on social media frequently. At no point during all of this activity did they once think to call 911. What the defense is going to prove in trial, maybe before then, is that Dylan and Bethany were aware, yes, aware that their housemates were being murdered. Since they did nothing about it soon after, and even hours later, it proves that Koberger, who has no link to those housemates, can't be the killer, because there is no reason why they wouldn't call the authorities, unless, drum roll, they knew why their housemates were attacked and murdered, and was told not to say anything about it. Again, fear exists only for a moment once reality has settled in. And that reality settled in when they started texting each other about it. But then you add a potential massive piece to the puzzle of Batman being called to come over and help clean up. Can't get rid of all the blood, but perhaps enough to, make things a bit, more reasonable. Those were young people, and there is no doubt there was pools of fresh blood in that house. Wait, let's see here. Dylan texts Batman inquiring if he was driving. Batman texts back, confirming he was driving. Now, there's another way to look at this interaction. This is a text during the drive, right? So Batman is physically driving them back home. And since it isn't a text to a driver to go pick up Kaylee and Madison, then this means Dylan already knew who was driving the girls and wanted to know the details, such as where they were, Another point which everyone should keep in mind, that this scenario contradicts Olivia's claims of spotting the girls arriving back home at 1:56 a.m. That is a major problem. If Batman originally claimed he dropped this is exhausting because it's a bunch of bullshit. If Batman originally claimed he dropped the girls off at 1:45 a.m., but it was corrected by Olivia and updated to 1:56 a.m., yet is texting Dylan confirming that he's driving the girls back home at 2:13 a.m., where in the flying fuck is the actual time of their arrival back home? We're gonna assume 2:13 a.m. Yep. Moments later, danger arrives. Kaylee attempts to call Jack around 2:30 a.m. Madison attempts to call Bethany at 2:53 a.m. And then they were murdered. Dylan adds Batman to her contact list at 3:51 a.m. A vehicle is spotted entering the neighborhood at 3:56 a.m., who now appears to be Batman, coming to the home, there to help clean up the mess. Yeah, we're rumbling downhill now, my friends, because we're tired of this shit. Olivia, she's becoming very suspicious to the chaos. Now here's a curveball thrown out there. Since Kaylee's family claimed that the private driver was a friend of the family, and Dylan was in communication with that private driver, this is inevitable. We're trying to keep a level of respect for the families.
But justice is blind.
Now let's see here the audio of the 911 call. This would be their reaction earlier that night. You see? Again, something isn't connecting here. Why would Dylan be planking on social media while her housemates lay deceased in the home? Well, to communicate with others about it, but in coded language. Something like drops in the house or whatever lingo associates with death and other scheming terms used. The reason she wouldn't use this coded language in text messages is it would be more suspicious texting individuals specifically while at the home, so she went to social media to do so. Many have pointed out the coded language used in Venmo payments, suggesting those were payments for drugs, so it's very logical to be the reason Dylan kept running to social media during that time frame. In conclusion, both should have been charged with obstruction of justice, and perhaps accessory to murder. Bethany is not walking away from this unscathed, but she better think wisely about who she decides to support, because if you do not cooperate with the defense, they have you on obstruction of justice for one, and you may be facing accessory to murder charges also. Provide the photos you took and whatever exculpatory evidence you have, and your obstruction of justice charge would be all you face, which is stiff enough. But then, if they peel back the layers of an accessory to murder charge, where you are found to assist in covering for the murderers either before or after, or even both, then your life is pretty much over. Dylan, well, she's already got handcuffs on her. These young college kids got themselves in a world of trouble, and the prosecution, also the defense, are not concerned about collateral damage at this point. You both are the subjects of being the new scapegoats, just like the one before you was in Coburger. Coming back to our first episode in our investigation, the setting in the home. That's where it's coming back to, have you noticed? Coburger purchased a K-bar knife. Oh, there's a knife sheath left at the scene of the crime? And his DNA was discovered on that knife sheath? Well, it sounds good. Surely his DNA was also found underneath Madison's fingernails then, right? Oh wait, there were multiple DNA samples? The jury doesn't know who the hell is the killer now, so of course, like mentioned, a new investigation has to be brought about. There's no way around it. We're tired. We're tired of breaking down all of this garbage. The chaos has to sift through a pile of junk to find something of value. The only value in that pile of junk is the value of thinking logically. They want you to run with emotions with every piece of junk they release before trial. They've been doing this from the beginning as well, But the more pressure building, the more we see how quick the very same young, precious college students that were protected early on are now being tossed into the crossfire without hesitation. With youth, there's ignorance. And after years in a prison cell, those young people would have learned a valuable lesson in life. Never side with corruption, because corruption only holds loyalty to corruption itself. And if that means take you down to protect it, well, that's what it will do. If it will attempt to have an innocent man sentenced to death, what makes anyone think it will not go after those housemates after that doesn't pan out? They're next on the list to protect the corruption. Unfortunately for those two, there is nowhere to hide. We knew this was the play once it was reported in the mainstream media that they were texting each other during the attacks. In fact, this was perhaps always the strategy by the state. Desperate times call for desperate measures, I see. The state looks at it this way. They can attempt to sneak out the back door by claiming it was the FBI who essentially led the charge against Coburger. And to be even more cunning, they will have no hesitance in throwing Dylan and Bethany under the bus as well. So they can come out in a decent position by their view. They only pursued a suspect that appeared to have committed the crime. Oh, we didn't have any malicious intent towards Mr. Coburger. We only were provided with the evidence collected in the investigation. Yep, but as we mentioned, corruption holds no loyalty but to itself. So the FBI would claim that we only got involved because local authorities couldn't solve the case. The DNA was determined to be Mr. Coburger's, so that's why we investigated him. They will all step away from the spotlight, attempting to push others in front of it. And at this point, two young ladies have been shoved right in that spotlight. And what makes it very dreadful for them compared to the state and the FBI is that they were physically there that night and have no excuses for their actions. The devastating question posed to those housemates, I know you were frightened. And it must have been terrifying to experience what you did that dreadful night. But I must ask you, why did you not call 911? So many hours had passed, and who knows what could have happened if a call was made earlier. Maybe some of the victims could have been saved. We don't know. But it perplexes me to understand why 8 hours had passed before a call was made. And since we have established that the time of death was approximately an hour prior, then it would be 9 hours. There was a lot of communication that didn't need to be made in that crucial time. Can you explain why it took so long to make that call? Lives could have been saved. This is the chaos sector.